What's going on, everybody? It's RoyG coming at you with a brand new video, and last week I brought to you my hand trap tier list for the November 2023 format post YCS Richmond, and so what better than to bring you a matching board breaker tier list to go along with it. However, when I was doing my research for this video, I ended up noticing something when looking at the top cut decks of YCS Richmond, and it's that board breakers aren't really that popular right now. Like, you see one in a side or a main deck here and there, but compared to hand traps, they're really just not very seen. So much so that it was actually kind of weird thinking about making this video, because if most board breakers aren't really doing anything right now, then what's the purpose in ranking them? Of course, though, I'm not going to just make a hand trap tier list, though, without a prerequisite board breaker tier list to go along with it, and of course, I really enjoy money, and so, even with all of this in mind, today I'm bringing to you my board breaker tier list for the November 2023 format. Starting off, we have Dark Hole, and I do not think Dark Hole is in a very great spot right now. So the main decks we're thinking of right now are going to be Unchained, Tearlament, Rescue Ace, and then we have Purely, and even Infernoble to an extent. And I don't know everything about Infernoble, but I'm going to assume it's like another combo deck that makes a good amount of like negation as well as follow-up. And I know it has a few pops. I know that's like a big thing. But keeping all of this in mind, we have Unchained, which is just going to float if you destroy their stuff. We have Rescue Ace, which can at least chain SP to prevent their stuff from getting blown up, and they still have all of their back row pieces. Tearlament, which is just going to trigger all of its stuff to float. Purely, which is just going to be unaffected because they made a Noir. And I'm assuming Infernoble has a way to play around a popping effect as well, meaning that Dark Hole isn't going to really do anything, and I'm going to put Regeki in the same boat as well, because Dark Hole, like, Ibly's not really running around very much right now because Sprite's only doing so much, you know? Though, to be fair, Rescue Ace is kind of using Ibly, so I'm not sure, actually, since the Diabellstar stuff came out. Let me know if you've seen Ibly around. I haven't. Yeah, I really don't think that these, like, destruction board wipe removal effects are too crazy right now. The only exception is going to be Lightning Storm, which we'll get into in a little bit. Or actually, I'll just do Lightning Storm now. I think Lightning Storm is pretty solid, mainly because its use against back row. Like, that's the best use of it. If you can use it against a monster end board, that's also pretty cool. But literally, it's just best because it's good for going for end board pieces, especially compared to a card that we're coming up on now, which is going to be seeing a huge dip in popularity because of SP Little Knight. Next up on our list is Dark Ruler, and I think Dark Ruler is actually a pretty solid card overall. You're not hitting like a bunch of stuff at all times, especially against like Rescue Ace, for example. They have a lot of back row to worry about. Unchained can end up having some back row to worry about as well. Tearlament. A lot of decks are actually fairly balanced in terms of their monsters and back row now, but Dark Ruler will at least get rid of the monster threats out of the way, so you really only have to worry about like the occasional back row disruption piece, such as like Tearlament Soliek or Escape of the Unchained, whatever the names of the trap cards are for Rescue Ace, I always forget. But my point being is that Dark Ruler is at least essentially just a free negation for all the monsters, so it gets a good chunk of the board out of the way, so you can try to play through the rest of the stuff, especially in a format where everything seems to be able to play through everything. Following up on Dark Ruler, we have Droplet, which I think Droplet is still really solid. I mean, since Arise Heart's been gone, the only thing stopping Droplet from being super viable is Shifter, but even then, Shifter's only played in a select few decks or in a select few matchups, and so Droplet's still a very awesome card because you can use it going first or going second, which I think is one of the key pieces to note here, is that you can at least use it as a disruption, even if you don't end up going second. And so Droplet can have a variety of different uses, from board breaking to disrupting, and you can even use it against cards that you're already actively using, such as Imperm, if you activate like a Rhoda spell. For example, when I play Bird Up, I usually activate Bird Call, chain Droplet, or I activate Tanky to search, and then I use Droplet. Stuff like that, really. It's just really good in combination with other cards like that, to where you can just get free value and your opponent can't really do much about it. So remember earlier when I mentioned that there was a card on the list that was going to be heavily affected by SP Little Knight? Yeah, that card is evenly matched, and evenly matched is way going downhill. I'm not going to say that Evenly's a bad card now. I still think Evenly is one of the most broken board breaker cards of all time, but right now, the best use for Evenly is against decks that either can't make SP physically, like Branded or something like that, like they literally can't make SP, or you're playing against a back row deck such as Labyrinth, and they don't have access to like Eradicator, they don't rip it out of your hand off of Lovely, because Evenly against a deck that makes SP, think about it, they're going to chain SP, banishing itself and another monster they control, and they're going to keep another card on their field off of what they keep off of evenly. So not only are they keeping a card in the first place off of evenly, but they're getting their SP and that other monster back during the end phase, meaning that, yeah, if you get rid of that last thing on their board, you still can't kill them. So they're gonna have a bunch of follow-up, a bunch of resources probably still in hand, graveyard, banish, etc. And they're gonna have an SP and another card left to disrupt when you're trying to disrupt their stuff on their turn. Like, it's going to be very, very rough. So evenly is just super, super niche right now, which is such a weird thing to say because I still think, like I said, it's one of the most insane board breakers ever printed, but SP Little Knight on her own completely invalidates it, which I think is just insane. Next on the list is Harpies, which is going to go right up there with Lightning Storm. We are seeing, like I said, a lot of back row lately. I think a well-timed Lightning Storm or Harpies against a Rescue Ace player is really, really solid because they lose all their back row disruption. The best they can get is the Search and the Graveyard Special Summon, I believe, off of their spells. And like if they use Emergency or something like that. But they don't have access to any of their traps, which is really nice. Plus, Labyrinth is even still topping, and it's going to be topping a lot more once Maze of Millennia comes out. And so a single Duster in your side deck, especially for just all the floodgates running around as well, is going to be really nice as always. Next on the list is Forbidden Chalice, and Chalice isn't really going to do very much. I will put it in minimal because A, it's minimal regardless, and B, it is a quick play spell, so you can at least use it going first as well. But honestly, the books just kind of end up being better, which we'll get to the books later as we always do, because a 1-for-1 trade in a format where everything is just super high power, it feels like it at least, just doesn't really feel too great. Next up on our list is Kaijus, and I think Kaijus are fine. It's still pretty good at stopping things like the Noir for Purely, and you can also hit certain things on other end boards as well. But overall, I mean, the Kaijus are still just 1-for-1 trades, so unless you're going against specifically Purely, it's mostly just outing one negate that you also could have just used Imperm to negate, I guess, or get rid of. Honestly, it really just depends on your deck. Next up on our list is Imperm, and I mean, it is a decent hand trap right now, especially because Thrust and everything is running around, and I did actually talk more about it in the hand trap tier list. If you want to go check that out if you haven't already, see here a more in-depth discussion on Imperm. But as a board breaker, Imperm is just fine. I'm going to put it above evenly because Imperm can at least just 1-for-1 trade with SP, and they're not going to probably chain the effect. But it just doesn't really feel amazing. If you open it in combination with something like Droplet, though, it is one of the most broken cards that you can top deck. Actually forgot to talk about Kaiju Slumber here on top of the Kaijus as well. I'm going to put it higher than Dark Hole and Regeki in the broke category, but it suffers from the exact same issues, the only upside being that you can at least search Kaijus later on. Next on the list is Kurikara, and I think Kurikara is pretty solid right now. A lot of monsters on board are going to be activating their effects in order to use their disruptions, and you can at least get a big Kurikara on board to combat some of the other things on the end board. And you know what I just realized on topic of that? I don't have Typhon on this list. But anyways, going back to Kurikara, I think Kurikara is a really decent trade-off because you're not only getting a very massive body that can punch over things that have already not been outed, you can actually get a free monster during the end phase from the opponent's graveyard, which can be huge if you take something like a Baron de Fleur, you can take something like a Castra Fenrir. There are a bunch of different options for a really good Kurikara steal. For example, I was playing Master Duel earlier today, and I was playing Bird Up, and they stole my Apex Avian, which was really huge on their part because they stopped on my Tri-Brigade effects. I think I saw it in a couple of lists. Honestly, I expected I would have seen it a little bit more, but it could also just be due to an accessibility thing. But I'm going to put it in the busted category in the lower end. I think Kurikara is a pretty solid card right now because in a similar vein to Typhon, as we'll talk about, at least being able to trade off with one of the opponent's cards before playing through the others is really good. Next on the list is Lava Golem, as well as Sphere Mode in the same vein. Thinking here, because these cards are very, very dependent because end boards are almost never exactly the same, especially if you have a hand trap or depending on their hand circumstance. They could have like more like disruptions and stuff on their end board, more follow-up on their end board, or they could even have like messed up a play, or you could have disrupted a play and they have just a random main deck monster shown on the end board that they're not supposed to have usually. So you could have these cards more live than ever in certain scenarios, but in other scenarios, I mean, like, it's just really dependent. Like against Unchained, I mean, usually they end on two things, so a Lava Golem sounds pretty sensible there, right? Especially because it stops something like Escape of the Unchained. But what if they only end on the Link monster or something? Or what if they only end on the rank 6 or something? Then you're sitting with a Lava Golem in hand, and don't even get me started on Sphere Mode, which is even more specific. So I'm going to put them in the minimal category. I'm actually going to put them below Kaijus. I think if they go off, they're incredibly powerful. But if we look at the format right now, everything's a bit too much of a clown fiesta to really determine whether or not Lava Golem and Sphere Mode are super good. And that's kind of like the thing for the entirety of board breakers for this format. There's way too much to keep track of for specific board breakers to fit into the mold. Like a lot of these cards, especially the next one we're getting into, are just really hyper specific to the point where it can end up making it really hard to tell if it's viable or if it's worth your valuable side deck space or not, because you don't know exactly what you're running into every single tournament. But as I mentioned, Super Poly is the next card, and I actually saw this more than most of the board breakers on this tier list in side decks and even some main decks. I'm not too exactly sure. I can see it working against the end board of like Rescue Ace if they end on multiple fires, which they usually will, like the Hydra and the Turbulence or like Preventer or something, or against I guess certain tier limit end boards and stuff like that. I didn't think it would be like super popular. I guess it might also work against Infernoble as well. I think they end on the Link Monster and then like a Synchro and stuff like that. It probably works on a lot more than I can currently think of. I just remember this card was seen as like not very great when Unchained was like the undisputed best deck because they ended on like a Water and a Dark and stuff like that. So I'm not too sure, but just because of the representation, I'm going to put it at the very high end of the blowout category. I'm assuming it's making some really powerful things, but let me know in the comments below if you know the exact purpose of it. On the topic of high representation though, Triple Tactics talent is basically just everywhere. So long as Triple Tactics Thrust goes unchecked, Talents is going to be one of the greatest cards in the upcoming formats, because either being able to draw 2 to extend is nuts, being able to shuffle a card from your opponent's hand into the deck if you already have combo is nuts, and if you're going second, you can just steal one of their disruptions, forcing out a negate, or if they don't have one, it's basically lights out. Talents was already a really solid card even before Thrust, but with Thrust out, it is one of the greatest combinations of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, because you just have 3 different banned effects you can choose from on one card. It's just so utterly absurd. And it's no wonder it's being seen in basically every single deck list as long as you can see a Thrust in sight. Next on our list is Ultimate Slayer, and I think Ultimate Slayer is a pretty solid card overall. The only real issue is that the only 2 decks that would play it are Flu and Drytron people are still a bit too scared to like step out of their comfort box with. And then Flu is probably going to be under Shifter most of the time, so they can't even really use it too much. For a deck that can use it though, I think this is one of the better ones that you can play right now, like in terms of board breakers, because you can send so many amazing targets on top of it to get a double disruption. Next up on our list is Underworld Goddess, and Underworld Goddess is fine. I don't want to say it's like bad or anything like that. I'm going to put it in the minimal category. It can out Noir and then other problematic cards. The main issue is just getting all those monsters on board in the first place. Like, I'm not too sure. I want to put it actually at the lower end of minimal, because it's really only good for outing the Noir, and it's really good at doing that, but other than that, it just kind of doesn't do too much to anything else. Meaning we can move on to my 2 favorite Machine Xyz monsters, probably, I don't know, at least Zeus is. We all know that Zeus, as long as Xyz monsters exist and thrive, Zeus is going to exist and thrive. It is still one of the best cards in the entire extra deck toolbox. If you can play an Xyz and don't lock yourself, you can make Zeus. It's so awesome. And so I don't think too much explanation is needed as to why Zeus is just going to be everywhere until the end of time or its eventual ban, which I don't think it ever will be. It's fine. But the one I'm really excited to talk about is Typhon. And Typhon I've hyped up a lot over on Twitter, which if you haven't followed me on Twitter, be sure to do so to keep up with news, channel updates, shitposts, and more. And you'll know that I really, really like this card. So it's probably going to be confusing when I put it at the higher end of minimal. So this card's actually being seen in a lot of different lists, actually, if they have an extra slot, and they don't want to risk having to go into Zeus or something like that, like trying to go into the battle phase or whatever against certain decks, they can at least make a Typhon. But why do I think Typhon isn't amazing right now? Too many decks relying on back row disruptions, especially Rescue Ace and Unchained being able to blow up with back row, and cards like SP Little Knight and other disruptions being able to be used with under 3,000 attack are the 2 main killers of this card. If we were in more of a format like super heavy format, right, where they were ending on like Baron, Savage Dragon, a bunch of other stuff with like really beefy stats, Dissipator, right, all of that stuff, Typhon would be absolutely insane because you just completely prevent them from using any of those effects. But the thing is, in those matchups in the first place, you have to be playing a deck that can really utilize Typhon and play under it, while also not worrying too much about your opponent simply beating over it. Because, for example, a deck like Labyrinth or Dynamorphia or a lot of control-based or trap-based decks can take awesome use out of Typhon, because they can just set a bunch of back row, go into Typhon, smack into something, and then pass, and their opponent's under not only that little floodgate from Typhon, but also any of the back row disruptions they may have. But if you're playing like a combo focused deck, you're basically stopping yourself from going any further in your turn by going into the Typhon with that lock or the restriction that it has, and you can't really set up much to stop your opponent from simply just beating over the Typhon with that 3,000 or more monster next turn and then just popping off and or killing you. I think Typhon will have a bunch of formats where it will absolutely shine, especially once Labyrinth ends up becoming even better come Maze of Millennia. But for now, it's just a really solid card overall if you have the extra deck space, but only for occasional matchups. Next on our list, we have the book cards, and I still think the book cards are pretty damn solid. Eclipse especially, Tayo not so much, but I'll count this basically as Book of Moon here. I think the Book of Moon and stuff like that are still perfectly fine. You can dodge things like Imperm or even Droplet and stuff like that to an extent. And of course, it's another quick play that you can set and use it as a disruption on top of being able to be used defensively. So it's just a pretty solid roundup of cards overall. And finally, we have Enemy Controller, which I'll admit I did see in a top cut list, but I still don't think it's all of that, y'all. I really don't think Enemy Controller is a super insane card. You have to tribute a monster in order to get that steal, and while it is technically better than Book of Moon in certain circumstances, because you not only get to prevent your monster from being hit with an Imperm, but you also get to steal a monster, it's really only good as a board breaker most of the time. But I guess depending on your deck, like maybe Vanquish Soul, for example, that doesn't really mind getting rid of some card advantage, then you can easily use it as more of like a disruption on when your opponent goes second, But it's mostly just great for going second and dodging like disruptions that have Imperm like effects in my opinion, so I don't really want to put it any higher than broke. Well everybody, that is going to do it for my board breaker tier list for the November 2023 format. Again, this was a really weird one because board breakers are in such an awkward spot right now. I think there's just too many auto win buttons that basically just say your opponent has to stop you, otherwise they lose. That makes board breakers a bit more iffy to play. You'd rather just stop your opponent from playing as best as you can and then play through whatever little they might have and then just blow them up next turn. It's also just really hard to tell when hand traps are a lot more generic than most board breakers, especially in such a Clown Fiesta-like format. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you like it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into 2 recommended. And if this content you're like the rest on my tier list, I do have that hand trap tier list, by the way. If you haven't checked it out already, please be sure to do so. Then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're near to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Not to mention, it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, want to support me directly while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link down below. Use code Aurora5 for 5% off your purchase and to support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.